On next. Was that good? That was good. Well, I appreciate you coming out this morning and listening as we kind of like to talk and share about what's been going on here at camp since last we gathered. And it's kind of, I kind of find the best way to go is if you just let me ramble along for a while and then kind of open it back up. I've had two questions so far about camp, and they've been really important theological questions. One question is, what's that mound of dirt for out there? Well, there's a serious answer and a not so serious answer. I was thinking that, I don't know if you've seen these ancient Indian burial mounds, different places. Just for $1,000 a piece, we could do that for you. You could be a part of that. I just made that one up really quick. The longer answer is it's a donation. It's interesting how you can find a variety of different things that people want to give to camp. And since my maintenance guy, facilities guy, Nathan is back there, Nathan is a very friendly fellow. He gets to know our neighbors. And he first approached one of our neighbors that was clearing a lot and saw a lot of trees laying on the lot. And he said, what you going to do with those trees? And the people said, well, we need to find a place to dispose of them. He says, it'd be really great if you could donate those trees to camp. And so a few weeks later, here comes a dump truck full of these little trees. They're little kind of scrub spruce trees. And all of a sudden, they kind of showed up down there by the wood pile and backed up. And then they started talking to more. So we're going to have some dirt from the dig out that we need to get rid of. Could you use some dirt? And so we kind of had two areas in camp that we were thinking about. One area is down by the sewer plant. It's kind of a little low area down in there, thinking, well, if you had some nice dirt, we could fill that in and get some grass growing. The other area is over here by the bonfire pit over here, and that's an area that's always kind of squishy, low, and it'd be really nice to kind of build that up a bit and get a nice lawn going in there. So the first few loads came in, and we got some bunch of dirt dumped down in the south end, and if you go down there, you kind of see that, that's the one we've had a chance to process so far, and some nice grass growing up, and it's looking really good down there. And another bunch was over here, and actually just a couple of weeks ago, we finally had somebody come in to kind of smooth that out, and then we had a work party last Sunday from Newburgh Christian Church, part of their service day thing, and there were several people, were they all in one family, or that basically spent their whole time picking rocks out of it and then smoothing it out. So it's almost ready to plant and see if we can get something growing there this year. So that's going to make that pretty. But then the trucks just kept on a-coming. So that's how you have the two mounds out there. So on one hand, we're open to ideas. Those of you who know my wife know that she loves plants, and particularly she loves resurrecting plants, plants that other people have given up on. She gathers those together. So you go behind the dining hall, you see all her babies out there that she's trying to grow. And so when I think Nathan said something about, Gene, do you think you could put a few plants on those mounds and kind of see if we can get something growing and making them look good? And so actually the last 2 weeks, the last count I had, there's 70-some plants that she put in that one mound, and she barely made a dent in everything else that she still has to plant. And to kind of keep the story going a little bit further, in March, we always get a big work party that comes in, and for some of those people who come, she just has them plant seeds in little cups, and then she takes those and puts those around camp, and so she's still got a bunch of them. A bunch of those are out there as well. So anyway, they're there as a donation that we're trying to figure out what we might use. It might be in the future sometime. We need those for fill someplace. But that's what the mounds are there for. So that's that question. The other question I had is what would it take to get carpet on the golf course? And was really kind of a great question. It kind of lets me go off in a lot of different tangents. I think we ended up going from what it would take to get carpet on the golf course to what's the vision for the camp over the next few years. And I'm just going to kind of leave it there. Say on one hand, I guess the short answer is the reason why there's not carpet on the golf course right now is because we got tired of replacing the carpet. Where that's at, you cannot believe how the wind keeps ripping the carpet off every year. But now I think we painted it, and now we see how the wind sandblasts the paint off of it. But it does make for a little brisker golfing experience as you're trying to get in there. And so I just want to use that. We're going to back up a little bit, and I want to talk about this is a camp's 75th anniversary year, the anniversary of when Bill Morse, pastor of the Amity Christian Church, toward the closing days of World War II, had a young men's Sunday school class. Maybe today we'd call it a discipleship class. But he had the class, and one of the things he did for motivating the kids, and I don't know the exact specifics of it, but memorize so many verses, attend church so many times, I'll take you on a camping trip. And some of you, I know I get in trouble saying this. Some of you might remember those days. Many of us don't. But, there was not a whole lot of getting out and going and doing something during those years. Is that a fair thing to say? So the opportunity to have a camping trip to the coast in those years would have been something really pretty special for that class and for that group. So as the story goes, they piled in his car. He's probably a typical youth minister type, says, I don't know what we're going to do yet. We'll figure it out as we go along. And so they drove over, and somehow they found this spot on the Oregon coast. And several unique things about this spot. Now, one of our local historians has told me that this particular spot, going back into Native American days, has been a traditional camping spot during the summer to come, from along the rivers and off these other places to come here to kind of gather. When the dairy farmers moved in and people living back up in the hills a little bit more with their dairy farms, as they would bring their families down and camp here on this location. We have pictures where, and this was a local historian was telling me, is that the troops from Fort Lewis would come down here and camp and train. By this time it had been owned by a local farmer who had homesteaded this whole stretch of beach, is my understanding. And then this next part is kind of my theory, but it sort of makes sense. But it's my theory. I can't quite prove it, but you know that in that period right after World War II, that a lot of these small coastal communities were created to be resorts. People from Portland, Salem would come out to have a place on the beach. So I think that's how this area got platted as the Wainema community. And so you have all the little house sites here across the lake and up there on the hill. And so I think there's probably visions of turning this into a resort community, maybe like Nescoin, maybe like Pacific City, Terra del Mar, Bay Ocean, way up there. But then, and just one other little footnote, people say, well, how do you get the name Wainema? Those of you that are, I always thought that the name Wainema was, camps always have Native American names, so they just picked a good one and did that. But when you read the story about who Wainema is, those of you, and there's a really better explanation back there, but Wainema was a Modoc Indian, and the Modoc Indians were primarily Southern Oregon, Northern California, so this was not a region for her tribe. But one of the signature event in her life is that she was kind of the go-between between the Indian tribes that was at war, pushing back against a white encroachment upon their territory, and then you had the U.S. Army on this side of it, and she was the go-between. And I should go back up because this is part of the story's best. Is Wainema was born Modoc Indian. She was sold by her family into servitude for a white family. She grew up, we believe she became Christian as part of that family, married into that family. So she was in a unique position to be able to translate and living in both those worlds. And there was supposed to be this big peace treaty, but then she learned that on the Modoc side of it, they were planning to use that as a chance to ambush the soldiers who came in to be part of that treaty. So she tried to warn them to say, don't go to that peace treaty because it's going to be an ambush. But of course, she was Native American, she was a woman, she was a Christian, she had been a slave servant, and so why listen to her? So they went, and then they walked into the ambush. That's where General Canby was killed, so the town of Canby is named after General Canby. And so Canby was killed, but she saved the life of an Indian agent, and that Indian agent spent the rest of his life finding ways to honor her. We learned that he was Indian agent in Tillamook for a while. It would have been about the same time, so we're wondering if he had some input, say, well, what should we call this new community down here? We think, this is a speculation, theory, but it kind of fits. Let's call it Wainema. Anyway, the Depression came. A lot of these little resort community type things, of course, went in the bucket. World War II came. The Coast Guard was looking for a place to set up a station to patrol the beaches. And just kind of think about that. My grandfather, this is another big aside, but those of you that ever drive up the Santiam Canyon, Highway 22, and as you're going into come out of there, you'll see kind of a big mound over here. It's called Monument Peak. Anyway, he spent summers up there with binoculars watching for airplanes coming in there. But so the same kind of thing. You just think about that whole dynamic of setting it up and watching for these folks. Anyway, so the Coast Guard came in. They had a station, and they had horses and mules where the chapel is, and I think still some of the original framing was part of that stable that housed the horses and mules, and they patrolled this stretch of beach from Pacific City to Neskowin out of there. All this is set up. That's what was here when Bill Morris with his little Sunday school class all piled in his car trying to decide where are we going to go as a reward for this faithful Bible study and like that. And they found this place. They came down in and found whoever was in charge at the time, says, looking for a place to camp with these young men. And so the Coast Guard leader said, well, yes, it's okay for you to camp here, but there's one thing you need to be careful of, is if we see lights on after dark, we're supposed to shoot it. And I've always wondered if that was really true, or if that's the story that they said. They say, okay, kids, time to go to sleep. You know? But after that, so his name is Bill Morse. One of the young men was in Ellery Parish, who was a big part of the history of our churches in the area, well known for his ministry. And I think it was given to Ellery to say, wouldn't it be nice to have a place like this to go to? And so Bill Morse got in touch with several other friends, other ministers, a few businessmen, and said, what would it take to buy this place? The war is winding down, so the Coast Guard must have been getting ready to move out. And they approached the farmer that owned the place and offered to buy this from him. And you just think back in that day, you kind of looked at this whole area, say it's really not worth anything. $5,000 for all this stuff down here on this flat and the part of the development on the lake. And this is a story as I understand it, right at the last minute said, well, you know that those lots up there on the hill, let me just throw those in. So this whole area, $5,000 that people mortgaged their houses. You know, they went together, 5 people, $1,000 each, mortgaged their houses, maybe they arm twisted their friends, and came together in 1944, at the end of that year, first articles of incorporation, let's have a youth camp, and let's see where it goes from here. So one of the ways I like to say that is ever since then, there's been some kind of a youth camp here on the grounds. There's been, and early in the 1950s, Week of Missions got started. So every year since then, there's been an event that focused upon the mission of the church and what God's doing around the world with missions. Then you want to say the rest is history, but that's the part where trying to pull a lot of those things together, how the camp developed from there. It's interesting in those first documents that those founders put together, because as soon as they had bought the whole place, and most of them were in debt up to here trying to help buy the place. They said, let's start selling these lots off so we can recoup our money and make some money to build the camp. So they put some restrictions in the deeds along the way. And we're kind of dealing with that now because after so many years, some of these properties are getting further and further removed from the original people who were part of it. And it's really interesting, the restrictions that were in there. The first, one of the restrictions is that it had to be a dwelling with a flush toilet in it. Surprise that guy. They think that you'd have it. And another one is that there was no manufacturing or consumption of alcohol on these properties. There was like a first right of refusal to the camp, and the other was that it could only be sold to men of good Christian stature. So anyway, along the way, and then they said, we're going to put these into effect for 99 years. And so we're 75 years later, 15 more years for those restrictions to be something that we have to discuss and deal with and negotiate and yada yada when some of these properties are being sold up here. But it made me think about 75 years ago how they might have imagined the camp would look, or even like I think about if somebody said to me, what's this place going to look like 99 years from now? It just boggles. I can't even grasp that thought. So what would they see that was different about the camp now? Would they be happy with this? Maybe. Would they go, that isn't what I meant when I wanted to have kids come to camp here? I don't think so. I think if you kind of look at the heart and the spirit of the thing, what did they want to accomplish? And to say they wanted a place for people to come, that whole phrase, for the glory of God, to somehow learn about who Jesus is, to hear his call upon their life, and to respond to that with faithful service. And so when you look over the years, there's been ups, there's been downs, there's been triumphs, there's been tragedies, there's been things that worked out pretty good and other things that didn't work out pretty good. But I just kind of want to keep saying that no matter what, we're still doing, I believe we're still doing the same thing that those guys envisioned back in the day, of being a place for people to come, let's say primarily young people, but it extends out to families where they're going to hear something about who Jesus is and be given the opportunity to respond to the gospel. I've been kind of privileged. Gene and I are a little over 20 years here so far, and seeing some of the generational shifts. Try to think, Jerry. I'll pick on Jerry here. How many generations of Rudbergs? 5 generations of Rudbergs that have been a part of camp. Does anybody beat that? Anybody want to beat that? So you have that, but at the same time, pick on our musician lady back there, and so here's a first generation Wainema coming here. So what's it going to be like 75 years from now? The possibility of a 5th generation along the way, and what's camp's going to be like when she grows up to be a 3rd grader and a high schooler, and all that. I've seen. I'm almost to the point where someone says, do you remember me? Not really. Well, I was in a First Chance camp with you, and I'm bringing my granddaughter now. I'm up to daughter. I'm not quite yet to granddaughter along the way. So I'd like to have you think with me and pray with me. So, looking back, you can see the development, and I want to focus on a little bit. We've got a lot of pictures over the years. A bunch of them are back here on this table. Another place to explore up in that upper left-hand room, we call it the Heritage Room. Anytime I find pictures, I stick it in that room. Feel free to go up there, poke around. But our 75th anniversary committee has been kind of looking through pictures and making a variety of displays around camp. And so to encourage you to kind of explore and find those. There's one set of displays with founders along the wall in that hall. Down at the dining hall, there's this huge display. And I really like looking at that one. If you've not been down there, go down there. If you have been down there, take some time. Once you look at the top picture, the top big picture, and it's a black and white picture from the ocean looking in towards the camp. I probably need to get somebody to date it for me, but you can see Myrtlewood Lodge, and you can see, I think, the beginnings of Morse Lodge, or what used to be there when Morse Lodge was, and you've got the old dining hall and those two cabins there. So I'm thinking it must be late 50s, early 60s, somewhere in there. And then the bottom one is last year, and it has a little different perspective. But the detail in there and the comparisons, and just a couple of things that I notice. One is to notice how actually it's been Week of Missions that has driven a lot of the development of camp. Week of Missions, when it got started, was held in the old horse barn, which had been turned into a chapel. So you see, that's some of these pictures where those are Week of Missions pictures, as they took pictures of everybody that was there out in front of the chapel. But then to have on this one picture Myrtlewood in, the reason why they built Myrtlewood is because the chapel was too small for Week of Missions. And so that was, remember, that used to have a big meeting room on the upper level. We've got it now into all things. But then the first missions building, which is like late 60s, early 70s, was because they outgrew that for Week of Missions. So they built the missions buildings. That's why this building is called that. Along the way. So you see that piece, you see how far the beach comes up, you see that there's no missions building in there, this is in the old one, you see how the trees are already little up there, and then you come down to the new one, you did a picture from last year, and you see the new inflatables that we have in the swimming area, you see RVs out here in the RV area, and the detail is such you can kind of pick out a few people in there, and just along the way they basically stop and think, what were they thinking as it went over the years, and the vision to say, how do you keep developing the camp in such a way so it can accomplish its purpose, and to have that purpose primarily missions oriented all along the way. So what are we looking forward to these next few years? We're kind of realizing that there's a lot of things changing right now. It's always been, there's always been change. The older I get, the more things change, it seems like. But the challenges of ministry in our day and age, things that we were able to take for granted really not too many years ago. Things change. Little things. I was sharing with somebody at breakfast time about how using the beach is getting more restrictive. Back in the day, we just get on a tractor, put some hay bales on it. We're going to go down and have a nice picnic on the beach. Now, even to set up volleyball nets on the beach, I need to get a permit to set up volleyball nets on the beach. What's that? Yeah, temporary. Well, if we took them out and back every day, we'd be okay. But they're heavy. So, we get big tires filled with concrete to go out there. But there's that. The increased usage of the beach along the way. I remember back in the day when there used to be a big parking lot. You went out and there was actually a parking lot out there. I talked to state parks about, why don't you restore that parking lot out there? They go, what parking lot? I go, dig down far enough, there's a concrete pad out there, or at least packed gravel. And if you guys would just come in and clean out that road and open it up, so you'd have a lot better parking. But it also used to be the only time you got crowdedness at the end of the road was on a holiday weekend. Now it's any nice day. There's somebody out there. Anyway, that's just kind of whining about having to deal with regulatory agencies. But things are going to get tougher rather than easier in terms of the variety of, when you do surveys of camp directors, what are your greatest concerns? Usually in the top 5 is increasing government regulation, and that usually comes because more and more of us are probably doing stupider stuff, so they think they've got to make a rule to make it work better. But so there's that kind of a change. I think there's also a change in expectations. What do people expect, particularly people who aren't comfortable with what we have now? How are you going to compare? I think you had that as one of your points about, you shouldn't compare your, I can't remember exactly how you say it, so I'll probably screw it up, but the idea that it's you and your relationship with the Lord, not you, and how do you stack up next to the guy next to you. And so, what do you compare a Christian camp to? In some of our camping conferences, it's interesting that they bring in people from Disneyland to talk to us about hospitality. So we need a Disneyland type, not just the hospitality attitude, but are people kind of expecting the Disneyland experience when they come to a camp? Should we or shouldn't we? To what do we compare ourselves, even in-house? Talking about a camp that's way out there in the desert or the mountains someplace. Well, I wish they had as many features as Wainema does. And then we go, here we are stuck on the coast. How come we don't have as many features as Wild Horse Ranch does? So and to realize we're not really trying to compete or compare with one another. It's trying to be consistent, honorable, faithful to what God has called us to be. The more I'm around other Christian camping people that aren't Christian church camps, is to realize what a unique system we have. And that system is that it really relies upon partnership with the churches. We don't hire a summer staff to come in and run the same program week after week after week. Our groups that come in, it's not like, okay, I youth minister and bring in my group of 10 kids in, and then we get kind of plugged into the rotation of how things go, and those kids never really participate with other kids other than maybe in a mass worship thing. But as they kind of go through the program during this week, is by the model of finding 2-3 folks who are in ministry, youth ministers, some teachers, whatever, say, will you volunteer for a week to put together a program at camp? Would you go out and find another bunch of volunteers to come in and teach and take care of the kids and stay with them and build relationships with the kids and share the gospel and go from there? So all that is, and that's really a kind of a unique thing. They say, how do you find so many volunteers? And I have to admit, when I was directing youth camps, that was the hardest part, was trying to put together a good staff. You have good staff, you have a great week. You have a few knotheads on the staff, then it's a terrible week. But that dynamic is, I think, is both a strength and a weakness for the camp going forward, and that's something we need to evaluate. One is, the strength is you're bringing in leadership of people who are on the cutting edge of ministry. So, for example, just in terms of family camps, for Christian Heritage Conference, you have a group of people planning this program this week. That's what their passion is. They want to, there's a message that they would like to see across, a seed they'd like to see planted in your life, some kind of a development that you can take back and put into practice in your work. Week of Missions, you got a group of people that are passionate about what God's doing around the world. Let's get a bunch of people together, and we're going to focus on missions. Family camp, we see the Christian family and people needing resources and help and encouragement to build up their families. We're going to go out and we're going to bring in people, and we're going to provide the opportunities to build up Christian families, and on like that. So it's not like, okay, I'm sitting here in my office going, oh, what speaker should we have for Memorial Day weekend, and what would be a good activity? Because I don't know all the answers to those questions, but these people in those committees do. That's what they think about. That's what they plan for. And you take that into the youth side of it as well. Just to pick a couple of examples, I've got, as I think about some of the youth ministers that are coming, one that particularly impresses me is he's in a pretty rough area of Seattle ministering to inner city youth, and he's working to have them bringing them down to camp so that their experience outside of that inner city-ness part of it is something that I wouldn't know the first thing about how to reach any of those kids. Another one of our youth directors is ministers in a small town down towards Eugene, and he's been recruiting a lot of these other youth ministers in his area to come and be a part of this camp, so that these kids who are kind of growing up kind of isolated and coming together to be a part here. So we're to say people that are really doing the ministry are coming and planning the program. Now, it's not the way I did it years ago, and it's not always like I go, you want to do what? how? Really? But if you have some trust and faith there to say, how can we make that happen? Because in that somehow you can do that, accomplish that basic thing, which is how do you communicate the gospel somehow to these kids and help encourage them to make a decision, some kind of step towards Christ along the way. And that's where I say, go back, well, what did those first guys want? I think they wanted the same thing. How in the world do you communicate the gospel to this set of kids or this group of people and help them to understand what the call to follow, and then help them take those first steps, next step, and that first steps and the next steps to keep moving in that relationship with him. So when they go to, we say, well, what would camp look like, in the years to come? Our board has become very proactive, and in a minute I'll introduce some of our board members to you, but just to say, we might not know exactly what it's going to look like, but we do know that some things need to change. And you can look at some facilities that need to be upgraded, okay, and fixed. So we talk about that. I've kind of noticed a pattern, and say I've been a part of this pattern, but I think it's a pattern that needs to change. Is basically we have gone along and say, what's the worst building in camp? Let's fix it or replace it. And we don't really put in a lot of thought to how it fits into the overall program. We just know before it falls down, we need to do something. And so you look at some of the things that we have done, and people have surrounded us and blessed us to help make things possible. I kind of remember when we first talked about replacing the dining hall, the old dining hall. How many of you have eaten in the old dining hall? Remember that? Okay. All right. And so it wasn't so much the nostalgia, but it's kind of saying, well, we can't build a new dining hall because it won't pay for itself. It's not cost effective to build a new dining hall. We should just keep what we have there. And a part of it, I have to admit, there's a bias. My wife's the head cook, and so she knew what she had to work with when we came in, and just lots of silly little things about the way that kitchen was just not very effective. But it was really interesting. Once we got into the new dining hall, all of a sudden we could reach out to guest groups. We could have a more pleasant dining experience and go on. So anyway, so we did the new dining hall, but that's because the old dining hall really parts of it was about to fail. Then we kind of moved on to, what did we move on to after that? Actually, the next development was because of some county restrictions. Right now they're not saying we can do anything that looks like we're expanding capacity, but we can replace what we have. So when we applied for the permit to get the new dining hall, they said, what are you going to do with the old dining hall? So we're going to turn it into a meeting room. Well, where are you going to take out a meeting room to replace that? So that's why, part of the reason why we turned Myrtleward into a dorm there and took out that big meeting room up there, because then we could adjust some of the rooms that were fairly crowded. I think those two lower rooms there used to sleep like 20-some people in those lower rooms. Anyway, so we did that. So that kind of drove that major project along the way. And then you come along, we did have a discussion. What's the toughest building in camp? And we started looking at the old missions building and seeing that basically that whole corner back there was turning to powder underneath the siding. So, and Kat just knows southwest corner. I wonder why, but anyway, southwest corner. And so we ended up with this structure. So, there's some things we thought about how we might use it a little differently than the old building. One of my thoughts at the time was the old missions building was empty 95% of the time throughout the year. How do you make use more of it? Well, let's bring the offices in here because of how far away we were over there. Sometimes I've regretted that decision. But other times it's been really nice just to be here when you need to run back and get something. And it just affords so much entertainment watching the RV area, watching people back up into spaces in there. We know that some evaluation of our property, and then I want to get off the property in a minute, but take a look at those buildings in the south end, the old dining hall, Yamhill Pacific, those two shower houses, and say something has to happen with those buildings. Do we want to knee-jerk just tear them down and replace them? extensive remodeling, doing it all in-house with donations as we go along? Or is there, and this kind of also goes back to expectations, what's the final product that's going to be more amenable? Let's say on one hand, I use that word amenable, so somebody comes in here for the first time, they don't say, oh, it's Wainema, this is how it works, or they come in and say, this is great. You know what they say when they survey parents, what's the first thing they judge a camp about? Is the bathrooms. What do the bathrooms look like? So that's probably my other big question I get along the way is, when are you going to close in all the bathrooms along the way? But I digress. But the other thing that we need to address more, and say to this point, and what I've been a part of, is most when we talk about developing the camp has been facilities. The next question we need to address is program. Will our model continue to work? Things are changing. The way churches view their ministries are changing. It used to be when you said, how do you get kids, who do you market to get kids to come to camp? And all the articles about how to convince the parents they should send their kids to camp. I'm learning it's not the parents you have to convince, it's the youth ministers that you have to convince. They have the power to say, this kid's going to come to camp, or my group's going to come to camp, or not. My most extreme example was where a youth minister said, we're going to send our kids to this high school camp. Another kid who had grown up coming every year to camp, all the way up to his high school years, said, I can, I got family stuff going on then, can I come to the second camp? And he said, no, we won't pay for you. We won't provide scholarship. This is the only one we're going to. That's pretty negative, but on one hand, I appreciate the passion that's going on in youth ministry today, but there's also a possessiveness that I'm a little concerned about. I hear a lot about my students. How are my students doing? Or even if they send kids to camp and they can't come, I need to come down and check on them. Like, they're worse than helicopter parents at times. Do I have any youth ministers in here? I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not really sorry, but it's just really interesting how that dynamic is kind of coming out. It's something that we need to be aware of, is how do we, one, help maintain that, what these youth ministers, their vision for their ministry with their kids, but also to understand that there's something really unique when you can bring your kids down and have them intermingle with other kids from other churches. I came from a small church. My kids grew up in a small church, you want to hear Wainema, and that's where they made so many of their best great friends, and understood that being a Christian just wasn't mom and dad and this little group that I'm a part of, but that there's a wider Christian community. My son Matthew played football in high school. I probably told this story before, but I'm getting old, so I can do this, repeat myself. So anyway, he's playing football. We played Dayton and Amity. And back in those days, and they still are, Dayton and Amity are powerhouse teams. I think our Hollies in here now. My son played against their kids. But anyway, Matthew tackled this kid. Look down, playing football, you're all padded up, you got this mask on, you don't really see the face. Tackled this kid. They were down on the ground looking at each other, go, oh, Matt, it's you. Oh, John, it's you. This is a friend from camp, along the way. Yeah. Well, I'll do it to you again, but, if I said that right, I think particularly for kids coming from smaller churches, is faith only just something my parents care something about and this little church that I'm a part of care about? Or is there anybody else that believes like me? So you come to a camp, you meet some cool young college-age people who seem to have together also say, this thing about following Jesus is important. You get to know that there's kids in other areas. So that transition, talking about from infant to childhood to adult, when do you start making your own decisions? It's not my parents' decisions. It's my decision. It's just this one. I can kind of riff on this all day long, but the other kind of funny piece that I think about, when you think about a little kid coming to camp, 4th, 5th grader, and it may be their first time that they've ever been away from home, and all of a sudden they got to make decisions for themselves. Which candy bar do you want? I don't know. Let me see. What's that green one there? Oh. Well, what's that other one over there? How do you want your ice cream? I don't know. How do I want my ice cream? There's no mom telling him how he wants his ice cream. So you start to make these decisions for the first time. So you want to go on the boat on Monday. Oh, I don't know. I don't think I can do the boat. How about Tuesday? Well, I'll try it tomorrow. Comes out on Tuesday. Tries the boat. Real tentative. And then pretty soon, going all over the lake. Friday night. What do you think about making a decision for Jesus? Well, he's been learning how to make some decisions along the way. So you got to keep that dynamic somehow. And somehow to communicate to the people who are making decisions. Should I send my kid to camp or not? Whether it's a parent, whether it's a youth minister, whoever is that influential person in life that makes them decide, says, no, you're going to go, or helps make it possible for them to go. To be able to continue creating those types of experiences, singing the Eileen song, that's really theological deep, but yeah, you can have some fun along the way. But as we look forward to where the camp's going in the future, I guess on one hand I want to say, I still think we're going to be doing the same things. I would be really sad if all of a sudden the camp decided it was going to take another tack and say, and I don't know what you could say is more important than finding a way to share the gospel with another person, particularly young people, and encouraging them to take a step of faith towards the Lord, growing in discipleship. There would be no reason to be here if we said we want to do something else. We want to put Disneyland here. We want to put a state park here. Or we want to turn it back to let it go back and grow wild. That's only other options I kind of see happening. But if we ever stop saying, if the reason why we're here and the reason why we do what we do is somehow to make that happen, for people to take that next step forward in their relationship with Christ, then I think we'll be okay. If we're still doing that 99 years from now, then I think we'll still be doing what God wants us to do. I mean, we all might be in, hover cars, and I don't know what it would be like, but I just know God's faithful and it'd be good. Let me introduce. I do have some members of my board here. Jerry LaFay here is our current board president. Angie Bartell is on our board right there, and Dan Smith over there is our secretary, and Betty Clark has been on the board. I guess I might say, who is there? Anybody else? Oh, Travis here. Yeah. Actually, Travis is one of our newer members on the board, and if you want to talk about youth camp, talk to Travis. I mean, he's part of a group that does a wonderful job with bringing kids to camp. So I guess, not a youth minister right now, but you do minister to youth. But anyway, so along the way, I think there's still going to be lots of challenges, whether it's from governmental regulation, whether it's come from cultural expectations and standards going forward, whether it's kind of changing nature of the churches, the kind of the dynamic of, I think probably in the past the camp was largely sponsored by smaller, like what we would have called a large church, where it might have been 200 people, and now you're getting some churches involved that are a little bigger than that, or a little broader than that. Some of the churches that have supported the camp are kind of dying out, and so and just some of those things changing in the churches. There's going to be a transition. I think the camp is in the midst of a transition generationally along the way. I've kind of have noticed that so far there's been 3 basic boards and directors for the camp in its time. There's Bill Morse and his board, and he was here for 25 years. There's Glenn Lyda and his board, and they were here for 25 years, and I'm a little over 20-some years now, and actually some of my board members are getting pretty up there. Not these guys. These guys are parts of the change. Betty Clark was president for a while. She made some wonderful changes to our board structure in those days as well. But anyway, so it makes me just stop and think. Our youth camp directors seem to be getting younger and younger, which is a good thing. So I think God has some good things in store for us. So keep that. Okay, I got I shouldn't do math. I'm a preacher. Don't do math. I'd say there's about 500 people here this morning if I did the math here. So we are in the midst of a fundraising program called 750,000 for 75 years of service. And that, say, well, what exactly are you going to do with that? We have an idea, but we're not ready yet to say exactly. We just know that God's going to call us to do something big, to develop the facilities and the programs here. But we need to have some money under our belts or tucked away to make that happen. We did suffer cash flow wise quite a bit building this building, and I'd just as soon not go through that again. So it's all about me. So I encourage you to be a part of that. Some of the interesting things that have come together, just to mention this. We've been a part of financial planning ministry, and that estate planning process helps you build a living trust, and parts of that comes to camp. And actually, this has just come out of one estate with the final payments coming sometime in the next few weeks. But in 3 gifts, we have received almost $100,000 from that estate thing. So altogether, I think is one of the larger gifts we've had, and part of that is a result of our being a part of that financial planning ministry living trust. And if you want to catch me later, I'm currently having personal experience with what happens if you don't have a living trust. So let me talk to you about why you should along the way. We've received donations of property, donations of stock, and if you put all of that together, we're going to be pretty close to a little over $300,000 that we can identify is getting us ready for it. So we're almost halfway there. Of course, the first half's the easiest. The second half is when you got to bear down. So just if you're thinking about how to help the camp continue to grow, there's that effort, that campaign to say, if you want to see the camp grow and develop and want to be a part of it, so many ways to give. So now with 4 minutes left, are there any questions or things you'd like to have me talk about?
I got a question. I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Okay.
One of the things I think he needs to do is to introduce your staff, the staff that is here, and you've got volunteers that are here all the time, and we need to know who they are. But the second thing I think we all need to do is simply to recognize Leroy and his leadership and the staff and what they do, and show our appreciation for that.
For staff, back in there in the gray sweatshirt, that's Nathan Stoller. This will be your second summer or third summer. Be his third summer as head of facilities and maintenance around here, and he's really brought a really sense of vision to help step up some of the things that we've been doing to keep the place together and looking good. So Nathan's a good guy to talk to along the way. Actually, next to him is a steady volunteer. His name's Bill Metter. He's part of our Thursday Boy group. That every Thursday there's a group of 3, 4, 5 guys that come down and just volunteer around the place, and their fingerprints on almost every building, every stick that's been put up there. And Bill also helps out in the dining hall quite as well. Here is Teresa Stalley, and go ahead and clap. Or you wait for me to say something good about her. Yeah. I was trying to think of something good to say about her. She has definitely lightened my load here as far as administrative stuff. Her, along with my son Jesse, have kind of taken over the whole registration process on Sundays and keeping all the record keeping straight. And when you think about the first experience that campers have is, it's like, and how are you going to pay for the rest of your thing? And they go, I don't know. They work so well to make that process go smoothly to help camp get started. Teresa's also in charge, manages our guest groups that come in, the retreat groups, which is last couple of years, each year we've seen a pretty dramatic step up in the numbers of people coming for guest groups. I should have her give a speech. If you're thinking about a retreat or a gathering, she'll figure out how to make it work, And And while, if you look at our income streams, I think our biggest income streams, youth camps, our biggest income, well, I think, is it donations, then youth camps, then guest groups? I'll ask my secretary over there who just did evaluation of our finances and where stuff comes from. But it's pretty close, Youth camp donations, I think, is our highest income stream. Youth camps, I think, second. Guest groups is third. And so without those groups that come in. And I'll also say, but that's also part of our ministry. It's always interesting to talk to some of these groups that come. And either I find out that individuals from that guest group used to come here when they were kids to camp, or when they talk about camp, they talk about it in the same terms as all you guys do. Just love, all that stuff. Let's see, who else should I pick on? And you got Gene in the dining hall. I've got Larry Swavarud as our camp host out here. There's Larry back there in the purple sweatshirt. And he helps out in the dining hall. We've got a couple of new volunteers this year. Kathleen, who's helping as camp host. She's been doing some cleaning and some cooking stuff. She's over there. And another one, Rhoda and Glenn. So actually, we're kind of having a whole bunch of cool volunteers this year. So it'd be nice to see all that happen. I thought about one more staff person. I don't thought you'd see him tomorrow, because we did have a change in staff this year. Scott Childs left for other opportunities, but we hired a young man named Michael Bailey as our custodian. He worked for us last year. If you see this really slender guy that doesn't look like he should be able to pick up, a 10-pound weight, and you'll see him pick up a 50-pound bag of stuff. But he grew up on a dairy farm, so he's wiry along the way, and he's been doing a great job as that. So bringing him on staff as well. Be cool. All right. Okay, I have negative 1 minute to ask for questions. If you didn't hear, she said Teresa writes some of the most lovely thank you letters for donations. So if you'd like a letter from Teresa, she does. It really opens a window into the kind of person she is. Jerry?
Sometimes you have to say no to requests, and I've watched over the years learn how to do it very gracefully. In point, those of us who have been camping here for 50 years, or a bit less, where we are down in South End, 5 families, we decided by SWAT and law in Oregon, we own that property. So we deputized Barney Lyman to come up and talk to you about some of our rights. We said to him, have you considered if you get the property, but the property tax?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we might be selling RV spots by the square foot. Okay, well, let me just say thank you. This particular group, so many of you are people who have been a part of this ministry for as long as I've been a part. You've been here longer, but they've been great encouragers and supporters. I'd like you to know that we're really committed to this ministry, and part of that is reflecting your example to us. Appreciate your prayers, in particular. Appreciate your encouragement. Who knows what God has for us tomorrow? I could go off on a whole nother speech about tsunamis and earthquakes. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? But God's grace.
How deep is the lake?
The deepest spot I've found has been 10 feet. I got a cool little gadget that I can, kind of like a depth finder thing. Anyway, I'm around. Grab me, talk to me, ask Teresa and Nathan if anything I said was true, or give them a chance to rebuttal. Let's bow together. Father, for this time together, just to take a few moments to reflect upon the nature of this ministry and what it has been, what it currently is, and prayerfully where it's going. Father, we recognize that there's a lot of obstacles to continuing as we are, even more obstacles to growing and developing, or even to understand what growing and developing might mean in your economy rather than ours. We just pray, Father, that for each day you give us grace, that each day you would challenge us in a fresh way to hear that call to follow Jesus and then take the steps of faithful service. But Father, we also ask that you do that for us, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of those that we might be able to reach out to, because we do want to say it's not about us, it's about how you can reach others through us. In Jesus' name, amen.